Good
Good
morning,
morning,
everyone.
everyone.
I'm
I'm
Matt
Matt
Robinson,
Robinson,
and
and
I'm
I'm
the
the
Senior
Senior
Finance
Finance
Advisor
Advisor
at the
at the
Landscape
Landscape
Finance
Finance
Lab.
Lab.
It's a
It's a
real
real
pleasure
pleasure
to
to
be
be
with
with
you
you
all
all
in
in
Lima
Lima
to
to
discuss
discuss
resource
resource
mobilisations
mobilisations
for
for
peatlands.
peatlands.
We
We
all
all
know the
know the
value
value.
of peatlands. Globally, they contain up to one third of the world's soil carbon. That's around twice the amount stored in all the world's forest biomass. Yet, around 12% of peatlands are drained and degraded, and this relatively small area contributes around 4% of annual human induced greenhouse gas emissions. That's the basic case set out, and I'm sure you all know, in the UNEP's Global Peatlands Assessment. The relevant finance question is therefore, to me, not do healthy peatlands create value, because they clearly do. The relevant finance question is who pays for that value, on what terms, and with enough certainty to finance the restoration up front. At the moment, there's not great data on the annual finance flows to global peatlands specifically, but I think two generalizations are possible. First, finance flows overwhelmingly originate from public sources. UNEP's State of Finance for Nature estimates that around $4 and $5 flowing to nature-based solutions is public finance. There are still only a small number of global examples, concentrated mainly in Europe and North America, where private finance is genuinely funding peatland restoration costs upfront. The second generalisation is that finance flows are far too small, probably still only in the low single-digit billions of dollars a year. Yet UNEP's Economics of Peatlands report calls for 40% of drained peatlands to be re-wetted by 2050, requiring an annual global investment rate in peatland restoration of around $30 billion by the end of this decade and $40 billion in today's money by the end of the following decade. Public and philanthropic money cannot finance this uplift alone. The demands on public budgets from ageing populations, infrastructure, security, and defence are just simply too great. But it is possible to move private finance, particularly in capital stored in pension funds and long term savings, into nature where the business models are understood. Last week, the Nature Conservancy published a report that suggests that more than $60 billion of private capital has been deployed into nature orientated activities in the last decade. More than half of this went to what we could call working landscapes, such as sustainable agriculture and forestry. So, at least $30 billion of private capital has flowed into the kinds of land based nature restoration in a way that investors understand. So, private capital is not absent from nature, it is present where the revenues, asset structures, and the risk allocations are familiar to investors. Peatlands now need to make the same transition from ecological value to investment proposition. And at the heart of this is the business case for peatland investment. The business case for peatland investment has four parts. First, there is the upfront cost: hydrological restoration, re-wetting, land management changes, etc. This needs to be financed by private capital if they can understand the revenues, structures, and risks. Second, there are benefits: avoided emissions, carbon removals, better improved water quality, etc. Third, and this is the critical bit, there must be payers willing to contract for those benefits in advance, with verification and safeguards built into the payment model. Yes, carbon buyers can be one payer, but carbon alone is rarely enough, and spot sales of carbon credits do not necessarily help finance upfront restoration. Other potential players include utility companies for water, municipalities, insurers, and anyone exposed to flood or fire risk, as well as major water users such as agriculture, data centres, and the food and fibre supply chains. Fourth, also a critical bit, payments need to be made on terms from which investors can derive a return. That means moving away from ad hoc grants and spot purchases to long-term offtake contracts. There is much to learn from electricity markets now, where renewables have become financeable over the past couple of decades, once long-term contracts, revenue certainty, and payments for system benefits like capacity have been introduced. So the business model, in short, isn't only to sell carbon credits and hope. It's much closer to a green type of infrastructure. Build a project or portfolio, contract for the outputs and outcomes, allocate risk between the different actors, and finance the upfront capital against future revenues. In March this year, the Landscape Finance Lab published a roadmap for financing Europe's peatlands. And we asked whether peatlands could become an investable asset class. The conclusion was yes, and it's closer than people think. The impact case is strong, the science is good, the benefits are well understood. The return case is fairly close. It is in some lowland peatland archetypes with high levels of abatement, the economic returns are actually approaching investable levels. The real barrier for private investment in Europe's peatlands is risk. And the first barrier within that is the revenue risk. So prices, volumes, and buyers of mainly carbon credits are currently too uncertain, which is why the long-term offtakes and the water benefit contracts are important. After solving for that, you have to solve for scale risk. You have to bundle projects together into portfolios to help diversification and size. And then finally, we need to make peatland finance look like infrastructure finance. So you finance projects, not companies or land. And that is a investment type, asset class, that's very well understood all around the world and over 100 years old. So the roadmap we put out is simple. Stabilize the revenue first, then add scale, and then think about financing structures, including project finance. My closing point is the same as my beginning one. Peatlands do not lack value. It means what they lack is the market infrastructure that allows the value to be financed. So I hope you have an opportunity in this session to move away from why peatlands matter to how we pay for them, how we contract for the benefits, and how we build the financing vehicles that can finance them at scale. So I hope you have a great series of discussions. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the debate. Thanks.
Good morning. Very quickly, a thank you to Peru for hosting us and the GPI coordination team for bringing us together. And I'm here not as Wetlands International head of Peatlands, but I'm here as the chair of the steering group of the Peatland Breakthrough, representing many of the organizations that are here present today and also online. What's a peatland breakthrough? And well, it's basically one of the tools that we would like to use to make reality what Matt was proposing. How do we attract funding? How do we mobilize different actors to add the private funding into the public world and to the public money? It is basically an urgent call to action. It's urgent. We know we need peatlands. We know we need to do something with them. We know we need scale, we need more funding, and we need to go large and quickly. So it's a breakthrough because it is a moment of transformation. There are many breakthroughs, like on coral reef, mangrove, seagrass. The one on peatlands wants to attract the non-usual suspects into peatland and into climate action. It stems, all the breakthroughs stem out of the climate action agenda. So they are ways of engaging the private sector into the commitments that the governments already had. All the governments signed for the Paris Agreement, but the companies didn't. How do we bring them on board? Well, let's use peatlands to bring this sector on board. Peatlands or mangroves or coral reefs, many different breakthroughs, but ours is on peatlands. So our vision is that by 2030, around the corner, but we have no time to lose if we want to reach the 2050 goals of the Paris Agreement. By 2030, we need to have peatlands mainstream as a global climate solution for their multiple roles, we know, and creating this critical pathway to achieve the net zero emissions by 2050. The mission of the Peatland Breakthrough is to accelerate climate action at scale, also by 2030. And we want to create a momentum that lasts beyond 2030 and from which the GPI can also benefit, of course. How are we going to do this? Well, what can we do? We need to strengthen collaboration, improve enabling conditions. We need to attract funding and take action on the ground. That's what you can do for peatlands in general, but let me dive a little bit deeper. What we want to do is to mobilize this large action at scale to reach the targets of the Peatland Breakthrough that Hans shared yesterday. And we want to do it respecting or following the Peatland Breakthrough principles of which I will give a peek into them. And to do that, we want to strengthen this collaboration, benefiting from the networks like GPI and others that were mentioned, like Mongolian Peatlands Initiative, for example. We have defined these targets, science-based targets, around which different actors can align, and we want to attract especially this private sector into the equation. Improving the enabling conditions is critical, and many of the actors here are already doing that. Governments are creating this environment that allows for improving peatlands. We also want to allow for the private investment. We want to facilitate that. And that's something that is happening, for example, in Peru. I learned yesterday from Mirval that they are already taking steps in changing the regulations to allow this private investment. We also want to have peatlands valued, and of course, we need science and we need a knowledge base. But most of the weight of the Peatland Breakthrough is probably on the next two boxes, on shifting and mobilizing funding. We need these new finance products. We need the risking. Probably we need public money to help de-risk the private funding. We also want the philanthropy money to help in these early stages of project development, of pipeline development, to later be able to attract finance. We also need to blend, allow me the term of blend, because finance people will tell me it's not right, but let's say compound finance coming from different sources. We know that only one source of funding won't allow us to cover all the expenses, the 100 billion that we estimate that are necessary to reach these global peatland targets of restoring and conserving peatlands and using them wisely. So we need to blend, to compound funding coming from carbon, biodiversity, water, and resilience. We need to compound both products and services coming from peatlands, and we need to engage the private sector by easing and creating innovative market mechanisms. Finally, all in all, what we want to do is increase investment for peatland conservation, wetland restoration, and wise use. This should lead to action on the ground. We want to co-create with regional and local actors these project pipelines. This is going to be a key piece of the Peatland Breakthrough. This consortia being developed at regional and national level, where different actors, not only those here in this room, not only those in GPI, but this private sector that doesn't even know they need peatlands, can be brought on board to create these larger, more impacting projects and programs. We want to track the impact that we are having, develop demonstration and concepts on paladiculture, for example, but also social agroforestry that was mentioned yesterday in Indonesia could be another example of the type of actions that we want to take forward. And of course, we want to promote and implement best management practices. This should lead to this large action at scale. These are the targets. I'm not going to go through them. It's just a reminder. And these are the principles. I don't have time, but they will be in the slide. You can check them afterwards. The thing is, we need to go large. There are some rules of the game. Not everything is valid, and we need to respect some basic rules. The coalition is growing. We have a whole bunch of partners already on board. We are fully aligned with the GPI. We are getting the support from Ransar and the climate champions. And we also have the support of different countries. We have 3 champion countries already on board in the room: Peru, Uganda, and Germany. We have 2 more confirmed, but we cannot disclose yet. It's secret. And we have many other countries that are here in the room, and I hope to have the chance to talk with you if you have any doubt about what you could expect from the Peatland Breakthrough, or how could you join. Finally, well, the Peatland Breakthrough will be launched in the UNFCCC COP in Turkey in November. And we hope that we can announce many other champion and endorsing countries in that event. So I'll wait for you there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva, for this presentation. Next up is Rolf Hogan, also from the Landscape Finance Lab and joining online.
Good morning. And first, a big thank you to GPI for the opportunity to speak to you today. What I'm going to do is give you a brief overview of the Peatland Breakthrough's approach to resource mobilization. So last year, the Breakthrough established the Resource Mobilization Working Group. It has been tasked with growing financial and other resources for peatlands globally. The group's been led by the Landscape Finance Lab, with the participation of UNEP GPI, the Greifswald-Meyer Centre, FAO, and Wetlands International. So the group's main focus is to develop a resource mobilization roadmap. This would set out a strategy and action plan to increase finance. It would include exploring innovative mechanisms and other opportunities across both the public and private sector, and building knowledge and capacity globally to mobilize finance, but at local and national level where that capacity is needed. A key priority for this work is that activities should be embedded in regional level. So basically, that means identifying regional needs and sources of finance, and promoting case studies and innovations that are relevant to specific regions. So the first activity of the working group has been to develop a high-level scoping of the resource mobilization roadmap. So this was finalized last year. It sets out the general framework, so including the goals, objectives, and a plan of implementation for the roadmap. So the overall goal was based on the finance target of the science-based framework for global peatland targets and guiding principles. And that is to mobilize at least $100 billion by 2030. So that's for conservation, rewetting, restoration, and sustainable use, or wise use of peatlands. So this number is obviously extremely ambitious, but on reflection, the Breakthrough felt that it was important to put forward a target based on calculations from available data, but of what is actually needed to meet the global peatland targets. So while the target's going to be extremely challenging to meet, it does reflect the scale of financing that's required, and the Peatland Breakthrough felt it was important to communicate this widely. So the main objectives include further elaborating the financial needs and potential sources of financing, but for specific regions, mobilizing those resources, so I'll discuss that further on the next slide, looking at how to reform public subsidies and incentives so that they have a positive impact on peatlands, supporting the replication of large-scale finance initiatives that are happening in different regions. So these are landscape-level initiatives. Promoting paludiculture and other approaches to production that are compatible with peatlands. And finally, focusing on building knowledge and capacity across different sectors. So from practitioners working on the ground to government and the private sector. And it's proposed to look at replicating the successful approach to peer-to-peer learning from peatland finance that was worked so well in Europe. So if that can work in other regions, we'll have a look at that. So here are the main priorities for mobilizing finance that were identified. Firstly, communication, so making the case for financing peatlands to both public and private sector players. Removing barriers to ecosystem service markets so that they can work more effectively. So that would include the carbon market, but also biodiversity and water, and potentially looking at how to integrate those markets more effectively. Looking at how to enable private sector financing by working with governments to create an enabling environment for investment. So that means looking at regulatory barriers and trying to reduce those. Helping to scale successful financing mechanisms that are working on the ground. So some examples that have been proposed have been green bonds, and there of course there are others. Exploring new sources of finance. So for example, Matt presented earlier on the EU roadmap for developing peatlands as an asset class for investors. Is this something that could work in other regions, or are there other potential new sources of financing that can be elaborated in other regions? Promoting corporate finance. So this would include supporting businesses in looking at how to reduce supply chain risk where there's overlap with peatlands, but also encouraging businesses to set and meet CSR targets that may be related to peatlands. And finally, looking at how to increase national budgets for peatland work. So looking at both the public and private sector, but with an emphasis very much on the private sector. And this is where the greatest potential lies for increasing financing. So this has been a very brief summary of the priorities set out in the high-level scoping. The breakthrough is currently looking to raise funds to be able to take this work further, develop and implement a full roadmap, and ultimately help us to mobilize resources that are needed for peatlands globally. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm wishing you all the best of luck with the rest of the meeting today. Thank you very much.
During the discussion, they are online. So if you have any questions to them, write them down. For the next speakers, I thought it would be nice for the speakers to come on stage, if that's okay. So we will have first Claudia Godfrey from Profananpe, then Uwe Bollhorn from Zug, Rosie Geary from Scotland Rural College, Rob Stoneman, and then Gareth Kratz online. So everyone, please come to the stage, and we can start with Claudia from Profananpe. Do you want me to do this for you, or this one is
Yes.
to go? But I can take it if you want.
No, I can
That's
take
it. Okay, so the big one.
The big one is. Hello, everybody. Good morning. We can go again, right? Good morning. Awesome. Thank you very much. My presentation is in Spanish, and I'm going to do the presentation also in Spanish because our translators are very happy, the ones that translate from Spanish to English. So I'm going to talk in Spanish, and we will share the presentation in the English version and the French version after the event finishes. So I'm going to switch. No voy a explicar lo que son turberas amazónicas porque estoy segura que en este espacio hay personas que saben muchísimo más de turberas que yo personalmente. Sin embargo, y voy a pasar a la siguiente diapositiva, creo que acá hay algo que nosotros todos estamos clarísimos y que es que existe una gran brecha en relación al financiamiento y las necesidades de conservación que las turberas requieren. En nuestro caso, en el caso de Perú, nosotros tenemos turberas amazónicas. Mi colega Patricia ayer les comentó sobre un proyecto que nosotros hemos desarrollado en Loreto, Y lo que queremos mostrarles en esta diapositiva es el gran desafío de la brecha pendiente que tenemos para cubrir necesidades y qué financiamiento disponible podemos encontrar. Y en esta diapositiva lo que les queremos mostrar es cómo conectamos financiamiento con conservación. Y la primera parte en la que nos quedamos casi siempre es en la captación de fondos, que es la primera lineecita de acá arriba, y el diseño de proyectos. Me voy a acercar. Sin embargo, necesitamos ponernos creativos ya desde hace bastante tiempo sobre cómo podemos tener sostenibilidad financiera de acciones, y una de ellas es la gestión de portafolios de inversión de proyectos a nivel de fondos patrimoniales, que es algo que Profonampe tiene mucha experiencia, y también la gestión fiduciaria de estos. Esto hace que acciones que se implementan en el territorio puedan tener al menos un pequeño capital para que luego podamos seguir levantando financiamiento y teniendo acciones mínimas en el territorio, porque cada vez más el tema de la contrapartida es muy apreciado por los donantes. Hacia el otro lado lo que ven es la intervención de Profonampe. Solo para contarles, Profonampe es el Fondo Ambiental del Perú. Nosotros somos una organización que fue creada por ley, pero la ley nos hace privados, y lo que tenemos como especialización es captar financiamiento y canalizarlo a nivel nacional para diversas acciones que tienen que ver con conservación de la biodiversidad, desarrollo sostenible y, por supuesto, atender los temas de cambio climático. Y el mecanismo financiero clave para la conservación de las turberas toma en consideración estas tres variables. La primera es que en el arranque necesitamos tener un financiamiento que viabilice una acción, que puede ser una donación reembolsable, una no reembolsable. Nosotros le podríamos llamar un préstamo a costo cero. Luego, cómo miramos que esto sea sostenible en el tiempo. Cada vez más los donantes internacionales, sobre todo, están buscando un retorno de la inversión, y este retorno de la inversión es no solamente económico, sino también social y ambiental. Sin embargo, ¿cómo hacemos que este económico siempre tenga el mismo peso que los otros dos? Y finalmente, el escalamiento. Voy a ser sostenible, pero ¿cuál es tu curva ascendente para ver cuánto más vas a necesitar de inversión? Y esto hace lo que Profonampe tiene como experiencia, por ejemplo, en una iniciativa que se llama Bioinversión Amazónica. Bioinversión Amazónica es un financiamiento reembolsable parcialmente, y es una innovación a lo que nosotros hemos empezado a trabajar hace más de 20 años en lo que era dar donaciones. Nosotros dábamos donaciones, todavía lo seguimos dando, y ahora les explico un poco más al respecto, pero nosotros ahora damos donaciones, pero solicitamos porcentaje parcial de reembolso. Y eso hace que el fondo que tenemos siga creciendo en el tiempo. Esto se ha apalancado gracias a un financiamiento del Fondo Verde para el Clima, donde nosotros ahora tenemos este fondo y estamos buscando otros inversionistas para poder hacer, por un lado, crecer el financiamiento como un patrimonial, pero por otro lado, tener mayor cantidad de inversionistas que crean en el financiamiento. Nosotros no estamos buscando retorno de inversión de los negocios, porque esto es para bionegocios, pero sí estamos buscando de que hayan algunos interesados para generar esta plataforma de inversión. El segundo se llama Bosques Tropicales, y esta es una iniciativa que en realidad no es nueva a nivel global, pero es un financiamiento de canje de deuda. Y los financiamientos de canje de deuda pueden ser una buena alternativa para buscar si es que nuestros países son elegibles y con qué otros países podemos tener deuda. Este proyecto Bosques Tropicales, este financiamiento, es el último financiamiento que logramos operar con canje de deuda de Estados Unidos, que fue el último que firmó Biden hace 2 años, en 2024. El siguiente es Rupi Capital, y Rupi Capital es una plataforma en la que nosotros buscamos conectar financiamiento con los que tienen proyectos, buenos proyectos que van a generar, en este caso, créditos de carbono, e inversionistas que están dispuestos a arriesgar. Nosotros somos la plataforma que le baja el riesgo para asegurar de que está bien elegido el negocio, bien calculado, y del otro lado el retorno de la inversión va a suceder y cuándo. Y el cuarto es una plataforma en la que nosotros trabajamos junto con el gobierno peruano, donde lo que buscamos es generar las capacidades para poder tener desarrollo económico en el territorio. ¿Y esto por qué es importante? Porque esta primera experiencia que nosotros tuvimos fue desarrollando, y en la imagen ven a un señor con su sombrerito y su delantal, es una persona, es un indígena amazónico, donde nosotros trabajamos ya desde hace más de 20 años también, desarrollando bionegocios a partir de los ecosistemas importantes de turberas en el Perú. Y ellos lo que hacen es transformar el fruto del aguaje, como les explicó ayer seguro mi colega Patricia, en un producto con valor agregado que es el aceite del fruto de aguaje. Y lo que estamos buscando es mercado, mejorar la calidad del producto, y esto es un proceso que se hace de a poquitos, con población indígena mucho más, pero que lo que aprenden lo fortalecen y lo instalan hacia adelante para sus siguientes generaciones. Y este es el caso del DATEM, lo que les estaba contando, desde el fruto, escalarlo de manera sostenible, y luego la cara feliz de mi amigo Segundo, porque efectivamente estamos desarrollando negocio ambiental y socialmente responsable. Lo que nos falta es llegar a un buen mercado y mejorar la calidad para que este producto tenga un valor diferenciado, y eso es algo que también en lo que podemos apostar. Estos son los logros del éxito que hemos tenido con el proyecto, y la botellita que ven ahí es una botellita que en este momento cuesta $7 puesto en Lima, que es muy poquito porque en realidad compite con toda la cosecha insostenible de aguaje que todavía sigue sucediendo, al menos en nuestro país. 3 lecciones aprendidas. Para lograr ese impacto a largo plazo, lo que necesitamos es una conservación con esquemas de financiamiento claros, una canalización de recursos hacia comunidades directamente, y alianzas importantes que perpetúen y que todas se encuentren comprometidas. Muchas gracias.
So everybody can hear me now? It's great. So I want to give a short introduction to the International Climate Initiative and the peatland portfolio. As you remember, I'm from Z2G, which is the implementing organization on behalf of the German Ministry for Environment of the International Climate Initiative. So first, a short introduction to the International Climate Initiative. What are the core elements and funding structure, the ICI strategy, and how this fits into peatlands and also the National Peatland Protection Strategy in Germany. And a short overview of the ICI Peatlands portfolio. So what is the International Climate Initiative? It was founded in 2008, and up until now around 1,100 projects have been accomplished with about 8 billion euros. And project selection is mainly through idea competitions for various types of funding. I will talk about this in the next slides a little bit. And important also, it focuses on 14 priority countries, where, for example, Indonesia is one and Peru is one. So we go through 4, let's say, focal areas. So mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions, adaptation to impact, adaptation, conservation of biodiversity, and conservation of natural carbon sinks. And this is where the peatlands mostly are situated. Some fall under the conservation of biodiversity. For example, the big project from UNEP in the Congo. This is under biodiversity, but all the other ones are within this conservation of natural. So this is the main framework of the ICI. So we feed into the big 2 global regulations, so the UNFCCC Paris Agreement and the CBD. As you can see up and low, the main ministry here for the ICI is the BMUKN, which is the environmental ministry in Germany, but some projects are also in the foreign ministry. It's the Auswärtige Amt. This is why there is the objectives are defined by the ICI strategy. I will talk about this in the next slide. It goes through these 4 funding areas. And what is the funding instruments? So the big one is the ICI Compete. So we have these large projects of around 20 million. Then we have the medium projects, they're around 800,000. And we have the small scale calls. And this is all, small scale calls are organized through the GIZ, and they're even smaller than the medium ones. And this is all goes through calls, and the most interesting would be the large call, so these large grants. And this is mostly published during the COP, to UNCCC COP. We have also other instruments like the ICI Invest or some strategic actions, like, for example, the interface projects. And we have 14 priority countries all around the world. Within these priority countries, we have these interface projects that are managed by GIZ. What maybe is also very interesting is here on the right-hand side, you see this 1-point local action. This is something specific to ICI because 50% of the budget has to stay in the countries. So this is very interesting. I think let's say the most interesting part of the ICI is that we try to bridge a gap between both conventions and with the local action. So these are the standalone. What is the ICI strategy? So this will then also, I will show you how this ICI strategy then feeds into peatlands and feeds into, and how this is also supported by the National Peatland Protection Strategy, which I showed yesterday. So we have these 4 targets up to 2030. I don't want to go read through them, but at the bottom line you see we want to reach 1.5 billion mobilizing private investment. So this is a very core element also from the ICI. So ICI and peatlands. Yesterday I talked about this National Peatland Protection Strategy, and we have 11 fields of action within this strategy, which specific goals and measures. And one of these fields of action is international collaboration on international level, but also EU level. I show here some of these objectives in the international, but what is most interesting here is that these international objectives should be fed. One of the main instruments is the International Climate Initiative. So this is one of this, where the International Climate Initiative really feeds into the international work Germany wants to do in peatland protection. And if we go then back into the ICI strategy, for each of these focal areas, there are some priority fields defined. And within the natural carbon sinks, peatland protection is specifically targeted. So just to keep in mind, in future, there will always be, maybe not every year, but there will be calls on peatlands because it's really built into the ICI, built into the National Peatland Protection Strategy. So what was done so far? On the upper right, you see, up until now, we funded about 66.3 million euros in peatland projects. And here's a break-up of these. So these are 13 peatland projects, but you have to keep in mind, these are specific peatlands projects. Some other projects also feed into peatlands, but these are specifically for peatlands. And on the lower right, you see the Global Peatlands Initiative. So, and how are they distributed all around the world? I took the peatland map and I used it, built up a little GIS, and you can see, let's say, in future we want to have more of these squares all around the ODA countries. Yeah, this is a very brief and short introduction to ICI and peatlands.
Sorry about that. I've drunk a lot of coffee this morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rosie Geary. I'm from Scotland's Rural College, but... Yeah, is that better? Yeah, I'm presenting on behalf of my team. So this research isn't just mine. I work with Professor Mark Reed and a big team behind us. And Professor Mark Reed is also the co-chair of the GPI working group. So a lot of our research is about fueling the research aspect of the work of the GPI. And our research is really about putting people into peatland research and peatland policy. And in particular, we're interested about how we can link up stakeholders and private investment, and how we can make that a process that puts people right at the centre of the work that we're trying to achieve, not just through the GPI, but for global peatlands across the world. And I don't need to talk about the public value of peatlands, but I do need to talk about the investment conditions and how we can bring people into that process. Peatland restoration needs money. I don't need to say that. We all know that is a big challenge across the globe. We need to find revenue streams, we need to reduce risk, and we need to think about credible assurance and making sure that clear rules on benefits safeguards the people who are at the heart of peatland restoration. And the research that we've been doing over the last 4 or 5 years is across Europe is about trying to bring together some of those conditions to improve not just the investment pathways, but also the impact that it has on the people who are involved and live and work in these peatland systems, which is why we're all here today. Why can I not? Is it not working? So the results that I'm presenting today are from about 5 years of research, talking to people involved in peatland restoration across Europe. But I would like to make the point that we are hoping that some of you here today can see this as a potential to scale into peatlands beyond the European context. This is not just a European challenge, but is also a challenge for some of the GPI's partner countries here today. And that's a really important point. What we've learned from speaking to over 60 individuals and partnerships working on peatland restoration in Europe is that to put people at the centre of peatland restoration and to encourage peatland finance, we need to share values. And I know that this feels like an obvious point, but actually by bringing together that research, we've understood that defining restoration isn't just a carbon problem, it's about putting people at the centre of it. And we've learned from these interviews and working with these partnership groups that by unlocking that idea around central values, it actually opens up a credible pathway for not just the people involved in peatland restoration, but those seeking to invest in peatland restoration. So it's about bringing that together as a union of values and finance. And it's set up this pathway that, actually I'm just going to move this here, that it's not just about the shared values, but also how we can bring people into management scenarios, how we can then allow that to open up fair incentives, so making the process equitable for all of those involved. It's about risk reduction and that investment pathway that allows for finance context that brings in people. I keep repeating the word people because our research has shown that people want to invest if there is a community at the heart of the project, and that is a scalable concept. It's not just about site to site, but it's about regions, and it's about the countries seeking to involve private finance in peatland restoration. Next slide. As a result of this research, we've come up with 4 credible pathways for private and blended finance investment in peatland restoration, which I know is what everybody wants to hear about. The first 3, I think, aren't new concepts to people. I think that what we've learned is actually some of the existing pathways for peatland restoration work, and they work for the people involved at the community level, but also in the investment level. So the carbon market pathway, the blended finance pathway, where we bring together both public and private finance, Some of you in the room will be involved with the polluter, so some of the lowland agricultural restoration projects that are developing across Europe, but also across parts of the Southeast Asia and parts of South America as well. So really trying to think about expanding beyond some of the peatland contexts that we're used to working in. And actually the fourth point is what I'm going to focus on very briefly today, because this is something that as a team really came forward in our research, speaking to people about the role of insetting. So a process in which different sectors invest in peatland restoration to counterbalance some of their Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions, which at the interface doesn't seem like a people-focused process because it is very much from a commercial perspective. But if you think about investment flipped on its head, where it does put people at the center, by actually making companies more liable and considering their risk processes and making them responsible for some of their investment portfolios, this allows us to put peatland restoration at the center and the communities that are living and working in these contexts. Next slide. So to wrap up, first of all, we know that peatland finance is a quality control challenge, and that we are looking to improve the quality for the governance for the people who are involved in restoration. And whilst we want to invest as much as possible, we really want to stick to that quality process. So it's about the people involved with it rather than just like bringing in as much cash as possible, because we need to make sure that the people at the heart of it are protected. And that allows us to think about how public finance should be tested against market rules for scaling, and how we reduce public exposure to that process. At the heart of our research is around fairness and equity, and I think that really brings in that people-placed research process, because we've been talking about people and livelihoods throughout this conference, and actually I think that understanding the benefit sharing process is key to that more equitable process. And my final point, and this is something that I just want to leave on, is around insetting. This is something our team is really keen to kind of develop, so I'm open to conversations, but it's thinking about that high integrity route that not only brings in and attracts finance, but also protects the people at the heart of the communities. So thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to speak to you all, and open for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rosie. Next up is Rob Stoneman from IUCN.
And I point it. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this. Try not to break everything. Absolute pleasure to be here in such a beautiful country. I've had a few days in Peru. It's been fantastic. So my name's Rob Stoneman. I'm chair of the IUCN UK Peatland Programme. I'm here representing the IUCN. I chair the International Myers Conservation Group, steering group member for the Global Peatland Initiative. Delighted to be on that. But my day job is Director of Landscape Recovery for the British Wildlife Trust. So I'm going to take you through to a small island off the west coast of Eurasia and take you back to 2008, where our peatlands, we have fantastic peatlands, very cloudy country, it rains all the time. But they're highly damaged. So all of our peatlands are either drained, burnt, cut over, under agriculture or commercial forestry. And back then we had some restoration initiatives going on. I've been working on those since the 1980s and 1990s and so on. But very, very fragmented. So in 2008 we set up the IUCN UK Peatland Programme, which was designed to bring together the whole community of policymakers, practitioners and researchers, really to advocate for better protection and better restoration of peatlands. And one of the ideas that came through that scene was that we wanted to think about taking what was then an academic idea by the aforementioned Mark Reed, who's now a professor, of course, to create a government-backed standard, a science-based standard, which will essentially convert the condition, so a proxy standard, so convert the condition of rain-fed bogs and the water level of fens as a proxy for carbon emissions. And so through re-wetting, we could turn those proxy measures into genuine reduced emissions of carbon to the atmosphere. So the idea was that we would enable those emission reductions to be turned into carbon credits, and we have a whole team involved to run that. So we have the staff team, we have the executive committee that I chair, we have a technical advisory board that really does the science part, and we also have a market investment forum that provides feedback from the restoration programme. It's really important that this code is seen as high integrity. So as well as the technical advisory board, we also have the code independently verified through the International Organisation on Standardisation, in our case through the UK Accreditation Service. It aligns with the British Standards Institute, Standard 701 on the nature markets, and we've submitted the code to the Integrity Council for the voluntary carbon market. So lots of complexity in all of that, but it's all about proving that the standard has very, very high integrity. In short, we need to make sure that the emission reductions are real, are sustained, and genuinely additional. And so that companies, so if anybody buys those carbon credits, they can be sure that they're genuinely purchasing real carbon emissions code credits, and it's not greenwash, because we've seen the market struggle through greenwash. So how does it all work? So kind of 6 steps to heaven. So we need to map and draft. So this is the initial registration, essentially estimating the kind of emissions reductions that are possible. And then when 3 years of that registration, document and provide a plan validation, which has to be independently validated. And that provides the first set of potential issuance units, which you can sell, of course. And then you have 3 years to restore the peatlands. And that then gets validated through a restoration validation process, the final report. And then at year 5, a progress report. Really that starts to set out whether the work has worked, of course, and your potential issuance units can then be registered as actual peatland carbon credits. That has to be verified independently. And then that happens every 5 years, and by year 15, every 10 years for the next 100 years. So it's quite a rigorous process to turn your reduced emissions into real carbon credits that can be sold. So how are we doing? Well, the code's been underway now since 2017. It really took off in 2020, especially in Scotland. We have 408 projects covering 59,000 hectares, equating to about 13 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is about the annual emissions of a medium-sized UK city. So that's not insignificant, and the code is growing. The code is in effect an implicit bundle. So of course, re-wetting of peatlands improves water quality, reduces flooding, creates beautiful landscapes for tourism and recreation. So it's effectively an implicit bundle, but we focus on carbon. So what we're now doing is to make the biodiversity part of that implicit bundle explicit by using the Operation Wallacea methodology to credify the biodiversity. That means that if you buy a peatland code credit, you could even buy a peatland code credit for biodiversity, a peatland code credit for carbon, or of course a peatland code credit for both. So depending on which methodologies you're using. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rob. Our last speaker is online and will be presenting live. It's Uwe's colleague, Gary Kratz from Zug. Is recorded? Never mind, it's recorded.
I'm Gareth Kratz. I'm talking to you today on behalf of the German Ministry for the Environment, Climate Action, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety. You might have already met my colleague Uwe Beilhorn, also from the ZUG, who is present in Lima on our behalf. I would like to say that I'm very sorry that I was not able to make it myself. due to certain time constraints, but I'd be happy to meet some of you in person at another opportunity, and hope you have had very productive meetings and will continue to do so in the next few days. So I was asked to have a little discussion or presentation on the national funding of peatlands in Germany. Some of you may know that the German government has been quite committed on peatland conservation, both on the national level through their own national programs, but also on the international level, for example, through the International Climate Initiative that Uwe Ballhorn may have already presented to you. So I hope that was interesting, and I'm now here to show you the national side of funding for peatlands in Germany. To get to the general side of peatlands, some of you may have already seen these kinds of maps, but yeah, peatlands are mainly situated in northern, northeastern Germany and northern, northeastern and southern Germany. And the current situation is quite dire, in fact, because over 90% in Germany are drained. This has been, well, a quite impressive achievement historically to drain all these peatlands, which has only been possible through a lot of manpower and a lot of very hard physical labor, as a lot of this was done manually. So a great achievement of the past. However, today we see that this comes with massive problems, and for the climate, for biodiversity, but also for farming. And yeah, we have a strong responsibility now to revert some of the changes we have made, mainly in the 20th century, to the landscape. Currently, most drained peatlands in Germany are under grassland use, but also there's a lot of arable farming and also forestry being done on these peatlands. And also the situation for a lot of farmers and the foresters is that the infrastructure on these on the peatlands that are under use, either through farming or forestry, is strongly in disrepair. So even though a lot of farmers would like to hold some kind of higher water levels to decrease the mineralization, to keep their land wet, and especially in the summer when droughts have become more frequent with climate change, they're currently unable to. So it's becoming more and more of an issue in a lot of the peatland-rich areas, and a lot of stakeholders in the landscape that are working with peatland are also coming to the realization that we need to do something and improve the infrastructure again and hold back more water. So yeah, that's something that the German government strongly supports now, and has set itself a target of minus 2.5 million tons CO2 equivalents through peatland rewetting by 2030, which is quite ambitious. A lot of these targets have been set in the peatland protection strategy, which was published in 2022. And the main implementation instrument is the German Action Plan on Nature-Based Solutions for Climate and Biodiversity, which has a total budget of 3.5 billion euros, and of which 2 billion euros are approximately made available for peatland restoration until at least 2029. And for comparison, this the total EU cap budget for Austria is around 1.7 billion in 2026. So it's hard to understate how big of a commitment this is to put all of this money into peatland restoration. So I think this really shows how how serious the German government is about restoring their peatlands and living up to its historical responsibility to restore peatland and have a positive contribution towards the climate through this. A lot of this has built on experience through 4 years of ongoing pilot projects, which you can see here on the right, where different types of use of rewetting, of rewetted peatlands have been tested and are now on the verge of being scaled up to a larger scale and also industrial scale. Overall, the peatland funding under the German Action Plan on Nature-Based Solutions for Climate and Biodiversity is structured into 3 overarching programs. The first of which being INAVI, which is focused on information and participation in the peatland-rich regions. It's also there for establishing personnel in these regions. It's there for also establishing concepts for peatland rewetting in the region. So basically setting the groundwork that is necessary to then go into the practical implementation. The second program is 1,000 Peatlands, which is focused on biodiversity measures, so mainly smaller peatlands that have a high potential for being important for biodiversity. And the third program is the German state aid scheme for wetting of peatlands under farming or forestry use, which is our most recent program, which is just now published in April 2026, and focuses on advisory services, but also the establishment of necessary prerequisites for water management. It's there for compensating the loss of value, so to the owners of the land, but also compensating the management losses of the farmers, which can be expected at least in the first years while they're undergoing the transformation of their businesses. And finally, it's also there to support the agricultural and forestry use after successful rewetting, for example, to buy specialized equipment, to adapt the farm infrastructure, to pay for advisory services, trainings, and also to support producer cooperatives. Getting into this big funding scheme for farming on rewetted peatland. As stated, it was published just in April 2026, and it is globally the first of its kind program specifically for paludiculture, so agriculture on wet peatland. It's quite unique because here we fund between 80 to 120% of measures, which is unusual for this kind of state aid scheme, as they are generally lower. And this has only been possible because we work very closely with the EU Commission, which also sees it as a blueprint for further peatland funding. So we really hope this will have a strong spillover effect to other countries, and this will really boost peatland rewetting in the European Union and beyond. One core aspect of this funding program are the lighthouse regions, dissolving the so-called chicken-egg dilemma. So seeing what comes first, the biomass or the industrial processes. So we want to basically push both, encourage businesses to establish more biomass and more paludiculture products into their processes, while also supporting the farmers in the regions. These regions will have representative value of and representative area of at least 5,000 hectares, so they're really big, and we really hope that they're going to give a push and have create a critical mass of biomass, but also people working with rewetted peat to really get a lot of knowledge and build up capacity in Germany. So we really have a long-term commitment of a lot of the stakeholders. And because of this, because we want a long-term commitment, these lighthouse regions will also be supported by the German government for 13 years, hoping that at the end of that, there will be established industries around paludiculture, and they will not need any more direct state aid. So that's the vision we have. And overall, getting into why Germany supports peatland restoration to this extent, we can see massive changes in our landscape. We can see that farming is heavily affected by climate change, that nature is heavily affected, and we need to store water in our landscape again. We can't just be draining water from everywhere. We need to keep it, but we also need to be able to control the water levels. And we need to retain water when there's a lot of water, but we also need to be able to give off water when it's necessary, for example, in high precipitation times. Furthermore, the German government really sees possibilities for exploring new economies under polludiculture, using this biomass for new processes and not only going by timber, but also going through polludiculture biomass. A lot of products have already been tested and first products are already going into the market. So we really see potential here for new industry forming. And lastly, it's also very important to consider the people that live in these regions. We need to provide them with a vision for the future, and we need to provide them with economical perspectives, one of them being, of course, tourism, but another just being agriculture. And agriculture is a very important part of this. Lastly, here are a couple of links. If you would like to read up on what Germany has been doing and what Germany is planning on doing for peatland restoration, we have the peatland protection strategy also available in English, and also the funding instruments are partially available in English. So if you're interested, you can read up on that. Otherwise, I'm of course always available for questions to you. So here's my email. Contact me anytime, but also Uwe Beihorn will be happy to answer your questions. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, let me know.
So we're going to move to the discussion section, and I wanted to mention that we have 3 of our speakers online. So Matt Robinson and Rolf Hogan will be there from the Landscape Finance Lab, will be there with us online, but also Gareth Kratz from Zug, who just spoke, available to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and great knowledge shared here, great advances, a lot of learning, a lot of opportunities to learn, because, of course, we know that lack of finance, lack of funding, and also not only lack of finance and funding, but diversity of instruments is limiting our actions on the ground. I want to just open up first to the floor. I think we also appreciate and wanted to highlight the fact that the work of the Global Peatlands Initiative Research Working Group and associated institutions are not, as I said, we're shifting away just purely knowing where peatlands are and understanding how they're changing and the dynamics to the broader questions that we need answers as a community. So I want to just shout out to the team that's working on that interdisciplinary research to see what motivates, what makes money move, what makes money available. So let me just open the floor, since we also do have, thanks to Gareth, Matt, and Rolf for being on the call. Any questions for the speakers as well that were in the room? Thank you, Dennis.
Ok, gracias. Cuando buscamos sea proyectos y la meta es escalar, la verdad que tenemos un tremendo desafío. Yo les hablo de la experiencia peruana, en donde hablamos mucho de aguaje. Acá en el Perú tenemos más de 5 millones de hectáreas de aguajales y una cantidad enorme de frutos de aguaje. Pero ¿cómo lo hacemos escalable esto? Mire, es un tremendo desafío. Mirando el punto de vista ambiental, de manejo, hemos avanzado bastante, pero cuando llegamos a escalar, escuchando el mensaje de Profonampe y también de varias entidades financieras, ese es un desafío tremendo. Particularmente cuando hablamos de nuevos productos de la biodiversidad.
Is anyone hearing
que han pasado
translation?
décadas para que
Yeah,
eso sea escalable.
we're missing the translation, sorry. Translators, which line are you on?
Que
Sorry,
han pasado
discúlpame.
décadas para que sea do you want me speaking English? If you want. Okay. When we are talking about escalation, that's a challenge. Especially I'm talking from the Peruvian experience. We have more than 5 million for hectares of aguajales. In terms of management, in terms of biodiversity conservation, we make a lot of progress. But when we try to escalate business, that's a big challenge. That's every financial institution is looking for that to escalate, to make business. That's fantastic. That's a good idea. Mm-hmm. Then the question is how to make it. Yeah. I'm going to tell you an experience that I have when I was in Gatesville, where I met Amy. I saw a department who make a lot of money. They joined together, the Department of the Sport and Food Science. They launched a Gatorade. What is Gatorade? Right now it's a huge international institution. They put together, and that was it. But how was the secret? They used a lot of experiment to make the business of that, to support the Gatorade with sport women, men from Florida State, from Florida University. Why don't we try to do it right now? Everybody's talking about soccer. There are many star suckers over there right now. Everybody's talking about Bociña. Who is Bociña? It's the best keeper of Cape Verde.
Yeah.
Why don't we hire Bociña and talk about aguaje? That's just an example.
Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. These are some tools that UNEP actually has been very successful in launching out ambassadors, goodwill ambassadors. Many of you probably know Jason Momoa is our ambassador on oceans. So this is something I believe that is an opportunity that this community, maybe we're also personally connected. You know, there's always this 6 degrees of separation away from a celebrity. So if you know someone, a person, an individual that you think would be a great goodwill ambassador, either through the entertainment of sport and entertainment world or otherwise, please do. Great idea. Thank you so much, Dennis. Appreciate that. The market needs to be created. The vibe needs to be created. And I see Simon put your hand up. Thanks.
Hi, Simon Lewis from University of Leeds and University College London. So I think a lot of the peatlands and peatlands finance has been focused in Germany and the UK and Indonesia, where the peatlands are mostly in a highly degraded state. And the finance around those are related to that and related to who's going to pay for these services that these peatlands provide. But where I've done most of my work in the Central Congo region, we actually have fairly intact peatland landscapes and very income-poor populations who don't have a lot of money to pay for services, even in the big cities that are being provided with water and other services. How do we have financial mechanisms that can work in places before they've been almost totally destroyed and need repairing and restoring? Because that wasn't really addressed in these finance questions, and it's crucially important, I think, to avoid going through the trashing and restoration and just jump straight to the long-term maintenance of these incredible ecosystems. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that point. Exactly. We know that in many decisions, this is a job creation opportunity. Restoration looks like a job creation opportunity. And that's where I roll back to my comments on the first day. When is it going to be a good, high-paying job to protect nature, to safeguard it around the world, not just in the developed countries? When is that going to be seen as a great job to care for our ecosystems, to protect them, and also use them and harvest them sustainably? So how else do we conceive jobs? I want to offer to those online to answer that question about entering into some of into the investment portfolios. What, if any, portfolios are out there that have an equal or opposite investment in protection? So what other levers are available from your experiences that actually stop, halt, protect, rather than make work through restoration or to avoid some of these large catastrophes? Opening the floor to the three gentlemen on the line, and if you want to wave or say hello or open your mics to take it, we'll offer you that answer to you.
Diane,
Yes, please.
I'll pop forward and say a few words about it. I don't think I'm going to answer it. Maybe Gareth or Matt will want to chip in. But when we were putting together the whatever the high level scoping for the roadmap, that was a big question: was how do we move beyond just looking at restoration? And a lot of these markets for carbon, biodiversity, etc., are very much focused on restoration. And how do we try and bring in financing for conservation? And in my humble opinion or my humble understanding of the whole finance world, I think there is, we talk a lot about payment for ecosystem services and, ensuring that watersheds are maintained. And of course, we've got to find the interested parties there, water companies maybe, or government companies, but also potentially private business. They want to maintain the water system. And part of that is not just about restoration, it's also about conservation. And I think it's about making that case. That's just one example from my perspective. Maybe Matt and Gareth can add to that.
Thanks so much,
just to
Rolf.
chip in briefly, I agree with Rolf. I'm not sure they're happening very well yet, but in concept, the concept of paying for resilience as an ecosystem service is absolutely legitimate. Flood risk protection or fire risk reduction, and will be ongoing as long as the land is well managed. The challenge, I guess, in some of the global south, and to the gentleman's question about the Congo, is trying to think through who might pay for that. But in Europe, I think that is the next step in ecosystem services, are some of these resilience payments. And you can see it happening in the electricity markets, where people, bits of the system get paid for standby capacity, backup, storage, and other things. And they don't necessarily have to provide that. It's there in case it's needed, and you get paid for that. So the analogy is there. The one bit that doesn't work for conservation as opposed to restoration, I suppose, is the current model in a lot of the global north of carbon credits for peatland, because that is inherently an avoided emissions payment. And of course, if the peatland is in good condition in the first place, there isn't any avoided emissions. So it's a very good question, and I'm not sure it's as well studied as the restoration markets, as Diana said.
So yeah, just adding to previous to Matt and Rolf, I 100% agree. From the German side, of course, we do have an instrument that pays into this, the International Climate Initiative, which also supports conservation efforts, and also supports a couple of peatland related projects, which also focus more on the conservation side, which should always be prioritized, obviously, before they reach a state such as they're in Germany. And in the end, it's not enough. It's by far not enough. It's just a little drop on, just a tiny drop compared to the efforts that we need and the finance that we need in these regions. So we have no magic solution to this, but we do need more resources, both from the public and the private sector, to support these countries in preserving their special peatlands.
Thanks so much. Are we calling it the wrong thing? What about calling it super cheap restoration? How is that, walk around, make sure everything's great, have boundaries, keep protection. That's job creation. So it's also what we call it, right? I think it's also what we call it. Amy, I see Oscar, and I see then Hans. 3 questions in the room. Thanks.
More of a comment and building on what Simon started this conservation track. I mean, looking at the Tropical Forest Forever facility, the whole logic was that, indeed. And interestingly, there was a lot of, in the consultation process, there were a lot of peatlands advocates as part of that. And one of the reasons that the canopy coverage was lowered to a lower percent was actually to account for wetlands and peatlands in some areas where the canopy wouldn't be as dense. So in some ways that opens that the use of proceeds from the TFFF could be used for peatland conservation. The concern is that even in such an ambitious financial mechanism that's gotten so much political traction, even at its best, if it's when it gets to 125 billion, which it's not there, nearly not at all, it still will only generate 3 to 4 billion in return annually. And if Matt, as he opened, what's needed is 30 billion per year for peatland restoration conservation. And so I think that's the concern, is that even in such a, we haven't seen movement around the forest finance like that in a long time. And even there, the scope of it is just a drop in the bucket. So then what does that mean for peatlands?
Thank you. Thanks, Amy. Oscar. Thanks.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días para todos. Es algo muy sencillo y es para la compañera de Pro Fonampe, el Fondo de Perú. Y es precisamente que en Colombia hemos tenido algo similar, que es el capital semilla, un fondo para capital semilla para hacer diversos procesos. Sin embargo, ha habido problemas en términos de sostenibilidad por el tema financiero, o sea, el cómo se vincula a la banca. La pregunta es muy clara: ¿cuál ha sido esa experiencia en el Perú que nos pueda servir en nuestros procesos? Gracias.
Gracias por la pregunta. Nosotros tenemos una banca de desarrollo. En Colombia ustedes tienen más de una, nosotros tenemos una. Y la banca de desarrollo solicita financiamiento, eso es una opción, y la operación sucede a través de nosotros. En el caso de la facilidad financiera de cuidado de negocios que les comenté, nosotros somos el fondo. Nosotros administramos el recurso y lo que estamos buscando es aprender cómo medir el riesgo de una manera tal en la que podamos tener el paquete, el modelo, para llevarlo a la banca y decir, se mide así, porque el riesgo en este momento para el financiamiento que tenemos en bancario tiene unos estándares gigantes que el bionegocio entre 50,000 y 150,000 dólares no lo va a cubrir. O se va muy arriba o se va muy abajo, pero hay un gap donde nosotros estamos entrando, porque hemos identificado que era justamente esa ventana donde necesitábamos entrar a probar. Profonampe, como fondo ambiental, lo que busca es generar modelos, y en esta creación del modelo estamos probando. Hemos terminado de entregar la segunda promoción de ganadores de este concurso de bionegocios, y lo que estamos buscando es ver cómo funciona la devolución, porque nosotros ya entregamos financiamiento en la primera, estamos entregando financiamiento en la segunda promoción, pero vamos a ver cómo funciona el reembolso. Por supuesto, nosotros hemos identificado criterios muy específicos para poder identificar cuáles son esas empresas con las que podíamos nosotros trabajar. Entonces, estamos viendo cómo funciona. En la tercera promoción tenemos todavía algunos ajustes que hacer, pero seguimos aprendiendo. Este es un proyecto de 10 años. Y al finalizar, no solamente vamos a terminar con un fondo más grande, vamos a terminar con una plataforma de inversiones que viene a sumar sector público y sector privado y además generar el modelo para que podamos a nivel global seguir aprendiendo. Gracias.
Yes, definitely we need to learn from Profanampe and that amazing seed fund, which was the GCF, the Global Climate Fund, right? So there are these emerging channels, seed capital assistance facility, which UNEP delivers. We also know about the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. That is also a UNEP effort. And we know, I see and notice the Indonesian colleagues are being quiet, but there are some good local funds that you've created. So let me pass to Hans, and then I hope actually we can hear a little bit more from Indonesia about the diverse funding instruments that you've already put in place and plans for the future.
Yes, a few thoughts going forward where Simon and Amy have been talking about. We talk about a huge area. 88% of the peatlands in the world are not damaged. We are talking about conserving them. And then we have, of course, always the issue, how do you protect something, services that are anyhow happening? Nobody is actually paying for things that are anyhow happening. That is, this has also been the discussion with the protection of forest in the Climate Convention. Then the smart structure has been thought of reducing emissions from deforestation, because you could show that there would be risks for deforestation and you would prevent them. So we talked actually about risks. So things that are not happening yet, but that you want to prevent. And these cannot actually not really be financed by markets, I think. This is a common interest, a common interest of national authorities, international authorities, the private sector with respect to companies that deal with risks. Then we talk about insurances. Because these are really depending on risks. So it will anyhow be very important to think about global financing structures to protect these things, that these risks occur. I think this will be a very big challenge, but the only thing, because we must not forget how large these risks are, also financially. So Germany gives now 2 billion to peatlands, but that is actually peanuts compared to the damage that is done by German peatlands. The German peatlands, by their emissions, cause annually a global cost of 28 billion. So once of 2 billion payments for something that causes a damage of 28 billion per year is very cheap. So we must show how large these risks are if these peatlands are damaged, and then the entire world must understand that investing a little bit in the protection of these things is really worthwhile from an economic point of view.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for that, Hans. And I see, is that Rolf? Hands up on, no, sorry, Matt. Matt, and then we have Narcisse Ofolu, and then Bambang.
Thank you. So I wanted to just try and weave together the question about the tropical finance forest forever facility. I've got to slightly mispronounce that, and the last gentleman's point on risk, because I think they're linked. The gentleman, I think, is making a really important point, which is the risks of not doing this are so big. Why don't we invest in it? I'd flip that around a bit and say, why don't we get those people suffering risk to pay for the ecosystem services that preserving or restoring these landscapes provide? Because any investment will come if there's enough payment in a business model to repay an investment. Okay, so I think it's about creating a payment for services rather than thinking about where the investment comes from. And that's where it links to the finance facility. These investors in the tropical finance facility, which is an extremely clever mechanism, they're not investing in nature. They're investing in a portfolio of bonds, of government bonds and corporate bonds that have been credit enhanced from blended finance and philanthropic capital. Okay, so they're not really backing nature. The proceeds of that facility are going into helping governments do more to protect their nature, but it's not very scalable unless you have lots more sources of private capital. So I would think more about the last gentleman's point, with whether we can get people to pay based on reducing the cost of and reducing the risks that healthy nature provides. And then I don't think there's any particular limit as to how much capital can be raised.
Hello? Yeah. Thanks so much for that. Narcisse, you had a question? And then Bang Bang.
Merci. Alors, j'aimerais réagir par rapport à ce point. Je crois que ça me réjouit que nous parlons de financement de la gestion durable des tourbières. Et tout à l'heure, avant de chuter dans ma présentation, j'ai parlé du fait qu'il était nécessaire à ce stade qu'on puisse réfléchir déjà, regarder, s'engager dans une dynamique de création d'un instrument financier auquel, pour la protection des tourbières, bien sûr, auquel on devra définir les mécanismes de financement. Et parce que à ce stade, c'est pas encore clair comme le financement climatique avec le fonds vert et tout. Ces outils sont connus, ces outils, ces instruments ont déjà des mécanismes bien assis. Alors, je crois que cela peut nous inspirer, sachant que nous avons des défis à relever en ce qui concerne la gestion durable des tourbières, d'une part. D'autre part, également, nous avons la question de restauration des tourbières dans les États qui ont déjà connu des dégradations. Alors, cependant, au niveau des États, il y a une dynamique qui se développe. Je peux parler du cas de la République du Congo, dont une réflexion est en cours sur comment rentabiliser les carbones, et plutôt les tourbières, excusez, à partir des efforts fournis en termes de conservation, notamment pour accéder au paiement de services environnementaux, au crédit carbone, excusez, au crédit biodiversité. Pourquoi? Parce que ces efforts, partant de l'encadrement au niveau juridique, du cadre juridique et tout, ainsi que l'engagement des populations. J'aimerais parler ici de la petite expérience au niveau de la République du Congo, en dépit des organes installés au niveau national, dans les zones, dans le département de la Likwala, là où il y a une forte concentration des tourbières, il y a des plateformes intersectorielles, plateformes multi-acteurs qui ont été mises en place, qui sont engagés dans ces questions-là. Maintenant, il faudra bien que nous puissions prendre une trajectoire commune pour que nous puissions regarder comment ces tourbières, comment le financement de la gestion durable des tourbières sera possible. Donc voilà pourquoi j'aimerais peut-être exhorter l'ensemble, je crois que de participants et puis des institutions impliquées, de regarder comment se lancer dans cette dynamique pour qu'on parvienne d'un côté à la création d'un instrument financier, nouveau global bien sûr, et puis appuyer l'idée de développer les actions sur le financement plutôt innovant sur la protection, la gestion durable des tourbières au niveau national des pays. Merci.
Merci, Narcisse. Yes, the idea of creating a global fund or instrument is definitely something that the partners have been looking at and discussing in the previous discussions. But indeed, we need to look a little bit more of what's out there. Let me pass to Bambang. Thank you. Sharing about Indonesia.
Okay, thank you very much for the time. So I would like to share, of course, we are already aware that the role of the peatland is very important, not only for the global, for the climate, but also for the sustainable forest management and also for the livelihood. So that for the restoration and then conservation and protection, I think this is our responsibility from the global, national, and also to the local. Based on our experience in Indonesia, our restoration and rehabilitation should be based on science, data, and informations based on what we call as a peatland or peat hydrological unit. We have already 24.3 million hectares. This is classified into what we call as the deepness of the dome and also the target of the water level of the peatland. So once already dry, then we should to restore that area using what we call as rewetting. This is investment, big investment. And then once this is already restored in terms of water level, then the strategy of revegetation, we can use polyculture or whatever mechanism adopted for suitable in the land. And also, this is very important, is about revitalization of the economic. Once the economic, can beneficial for the people, then of course, they say that the peatland is as an asset should be protected by themselves. This is the reality from the field. So according to me, there are so many resources, potential resources can be shared together in terms of the international, of course, to provide the data and information base to maintain the peatland peat hydrological information, in which area should be restored, in which area should be managed properly for the conservation. And then, of course, for the sustainable finance mechanism, we can also, not only from the SFM and also livelihood, but from the carbon, carbon. Maybe, for example, in some area of the peatland managed by the concession, what I tell already to you in my presentation, they create like a project carbon-based project, and then it will be launched maybe next week, next by the minister, issuance of the carbon credit of 36 million ton unit carbon, and then it can be, by agreement buyer with the seller, how many US dollar per ton unit carbon. Then the money, of course, it can be for the restore of the area for the sustainable manner. But the question is for the community, maybe for example for the community in terms of the carbon project, maybe for example for the developing of the carbon, they need like investment. Mitigation action also need investment. So can we use like international support in terms of this kind of activity, which enable like a fair between private and also a community doing proper management in the peatland area? I think this is my comment. Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much. Indeed, the public investment is critical. And I think that what we need to do as well is to make sure that the people that are taking care of peatlands are also managing to get some investment and some budget from their national budgets to also take action for protection in the case of protection. I mean, Indonesia is an archipelagic island, so not all of your peatlands are in the restoration state. Do you have any mechanism, any finance facility, or any green bond or anything that is investing or protecting something that's already in healthy state?
Okay. Actually, we have like a result-based payment from the carbon initiative, Red Plus. Yes. And then the money benefit sharing mechanism, we distribute to the provincial to restore also the degraded area of the peatland, which enable to achieve the target of the follow nursing 2030. This is the idea. And we also have like other possibility with the voluntary carbon market. Yeah, maybe for example like using Plan Vivo or Vera or whatever. This is also another possibility. But what I'm going to say, this is very important. We use the resources from our own budget, but also with the international support. This will be great, I think. Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much. It's about blending these packages together. Let me pass to Eva, and then we're going to try to wrap this up. I'll just say some few parting ideas to spark discussion over the coffee break.
Thank you. I think it's not only abounding on the idea of conserving. How do we attract funding into conservation? How do we keep money away from destruction would also be a question. And I think there's a critical aspect there, and it's cost-benefit analysis. Do we have cost-benefit analysis models that are fit for purpose to be used in peatlands that can capture the benefits of these ecosystem services, these nature-based solutions, or the value of biodiversity in this cost-benefit analysis, to show that maybe a short-term benefit is not so beneficial compared to the long-term one, that the risks are higher than the damage. The risk is higher than the short-term benefit. So it's not only how you attract funding into good, how you keep money away from bad. And this also has to do with incentives. It's not always money, it's also permits, it's access, it's many other things that need to be kept into the equation. And I know that we're talking about finance here, but it's a complex problem, so it needs a complex solution also.
Absolutely critical, shifting from those perverse incentives to the actually incentives that benefit many, but also shifting off of sort of doomed infrastructure projects, frankly. If you're going to try to transect a peatland from one side of your country to another, it's really going to be a money pit. And if you haven't seen the movie, you should roll back in history and have a look at what a money pit is. But yes, I think this conversation can definitely carry on and continue into the coffee break. Some great sparky ideas as well. Celebrity, sport, how do we get advocates to draw to the topic? I was watching actually our reels of our videos, and I thought, do you guys know what an ASMR is? Who knows what ASMR is? Yes, thanks. I have some young kids. It's autonomous sensory meridian response. It is the vibe on TikTok, on Instagram. All the kids are watching these videos. That's a money maker. Can you imagine a video of a core, right? Unravel the core. You cannot believe how much money that would bring into our peatland community. I'm going to go for it. So who wants to join me on that? A bunch of coring reels that will actually be the next trend, the new trend for ASMR response. Let's go to our coffee break. One other big target should be the fashion industry. UNEP worked with Gucci a number of years back to help them to make their first ever carbon neutral fashion show. We managed to get them to invest in some peatlands instead of just traditional forests. So let's try to think about how other communities are doing it and how we can do it together better. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy.